Welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're going to unpack and compare two absolute titans of conflict poetry to help you completely ace your AQA GCSE English exams. We're looking at Alfred Lord Tennyson's The Charge of the Light Brigade right alongside Simon Armitage's Remains. Both of these poems are cornerstones of the Power and Conflict anthology. But, as you'll see, they approach the battlefield from completely different angles.
Okay, let's just dive right into this stark contrast. On one side, we've got Tennyson's grand, highly romanticized vision of 19th century warfare into the Valley of Death. I mean, it's epic, right? It's almost biblical. But then, on the flip side, we have Armitage's gritty, incredibly colloquial depiction of modern combat, tosses his guts back into his body. Just by comparing these two lines alone, you can instantly feel this massive shift. We're moving away from that Victorian glorification of collective sacrifice, straight into a modern, almost uncomfortably casual confrontation with the visceral reality of death.
So here's our roadmap for today. First up, Two Wars, Two Voices. Second, The Light Brigade. Third, The Remains of War. Fourth, Comparing the Conflict. And finally, number 5, Acing Your Essay. Let's get into it.
Two Wars, Two Voices. To truly understand these poems and, actually unlock those top grades, we first have to look at the vastly different eras and battlefields that birthed them in the first place. We're really looking at the evolution of warfare itself and how society processes it. Think about it. Tennyson's poem was written during the 1854 Crimean War. Back then, Britain's imperial power was viewed as this great moral force, and war was heavily propagandized as glorious and heroic. Now contrast that with Armitage's subject matter, the 21st century Iraq War. This modern conflict was highly controversial. It was heavily scrutinized by the media, and it really brought with it a brand new awareness of the incredibly complex psychological toll that combat takes on the individual soldier.
Moving on to Part 2, The Light Brigade. Let's step back in time to 1854. As Poet Laureate Alfred Lord Tennyson wrote his famous ballad just 6 weeks after a disastrous military blunder at the Battle of Balaclava, where hundreds of lightly armed cavalrymen were literally sent charging directly into heavy Russian artillery.
Now, what is super interesting here is the origin of the poem's rhythm. Tennyson actually read an account of this tragedy in the Times newspaper. He was so incredibly moved by the phrase, "someone had blundered," in that journalistic dispatch, that he instantly transformed the sacrifice of those 600 soldiers into this musical, hypnotic, and highly structured offering. The whole point was to immortalize their bravery.
And the absolute engine of that musicality is something called dactylic dimeter. Try listening to the rapid, rhythmic pacing here. Half a league, half a league, half a league onward. It literally mimics the sound of galloping horses. But analytically speaking, it does so much more than that. This unrelenting, forward-driving rhythm represents the soldiers' blind, unquestioning obedience. It's like they're caught up in this massive momentum they just cannot stop, completely driven forward by duty and strict military discipline.
But if we zoom in on the word blundered, we actually see Tennyson doing something quite subversive for a Victorian poet laureate. He's subtly criticizing the fatal mismanagement of the aristocratic military leadership. He acknowledges the massive mistake, the blunder, but simultaneously he's glorifying the stoic heroism of the men who rode light into those cannons anyway. It is just a brilliant balancing act. It's patriotic celebration on one hand and a quiet, pointed critique of those in charge on the other.
So here's the really crucial point. While Tennyson focuses entirely on collective battlefield glory and building national memory, we're kind of left with this lingering question. What actually happens when the gunfire stops? What happens when the soldier survives, but the psychological war is just beginning?
Which brings us to Section 3, The Remains of War. This pulls us right into the modern era, with Simon Armitage's Remains. Now, this poem is actually based on the real-life account of a soldier, Guardsman Tromans, who returned from serving in Basra, Iraq, back in 2003.
Armitage actually wrote this piece for a 2007 Channel 4 documentary called The Not Dead, and its primary aim? To really raise public awareness about PTSD, or post-traumatic stress disorder. It completely forces us to look at what happens when the true horror of conflict is brought back from the front lines and just unleashed within the domestic, everyday sphere.
Now, unlike Tennyson's galloping, rigid rhythm, Armitage chooses the form of a dramatic monologue. The pacing here is hesitant, it's colloquial, and it's highly conversational. He uses heavy enjambment, which is where sentences spill over line breaks without any punctuation. And this structural choice, it brilliantly blurs the lines between the past and the present. As the soldier speaks, he slips seamlessly into these flashbacks. It genuinely makes the reader feel like they're sitting on a stream of consciousness therapy session, where the trauma is literally being relived in real time.
Let's take a look at how this guilt builds. The phrase, "his bloody life in my bloody hands," is just a phenomenal piece of text to analyze for your exams. Actually, it's a brilliant allusion to Shakespeare's Macbeth, specifically Lady Macbeth, furiously trying to wash that imaginary blood from her hands. It proves that the psychological weight of taking a human life is this unnatural, inescapable torment. The blood acts as a permanent, incredibly haunting motif of guilt.
And honestly, this beautifully illustrates exactly why the title Remains is just so perfect. It has this haunting double meaning. On one hand, it signifies the literal, graphic remains, the disposed body of the looter who is treated basically like rubbish and just tossed into a lorry. But on the other hand, it refers to the agonizing memories and trauma that remain permanently lodged in the soldier's mind, leaving him damaged beyond repair long after his actual tour of duty is over.
Section 4. Comparing the conflict. Now that we have a really firm grasp on both texts individually, it's time to do what the examiners really want to see. Synthesize them. We need to discover exactly where these two starkly different voices actually intersect and where they completely diverge.
So looking at the synthesis, both poets actually critique the gritty reality of war versus the sanitized propaganda version of it. They both deal with soldiers acting under blind obedience, yet their core focus is entirely different. Think about it. Tennyson immortalizes a collective physical sacrifice out on the battlefield to inspire a whole nation. Meanwhile, Armitage intimately mourns individual psychological destruction right in the quiet of a living room, really just trying to evoke our empathy. Structurally, both poets use repetition almost like a weapon to convey feeling, specifically a technique called anaphora. Tennyson surrounds his men physically with danger, cannon to right of them, cannon to left of them. It builds this intense, inescapable, heroic tension. Armitage, however, traps his soldier in a mental loop of uncertainty. Probably armed, possibly not. He repeats this exact phrase to show us how the soldier's mind is obsessively replaying the event, completely unable to find peace or any sort of justification.
Finally, Section 5, Acing Your Essay. For those of you aiming for those absolute top-tier grades in your exams, here is exactly how you need to structure your comparative analysis to make your essay really stand out to the examiner.
Listen closely here, because this is absolutely crucial. Do not just list facts or summarize the stories. No way. You must zoom in on specific language choices, like Tennyson's subversive use of blundered or Armitage's highly colloquial use of legsit, and you have to directly link them to the differing contexts of Victorian patriotism and modern disillusionment. Remember, your context shouldn't just be bolted on at the very end of a paragraph. It needs to actively drive your analysis of the poet's methods.
I'd recommend following these exact steps to craft a really winning argument. Start off by comparing how memory is used as a glorious monument in Tennyson and then as a damaging weapon in Armitage. Then contrast the pacing. You want to prove to the examiner that form dictates meaning. Tennyson's rigid dactylic D-meter reflects strict discipline, while Armitage's fragmented free verse reflects a severely broken mind. Finally, conclude your essay on how the overall perception of the soldier has shifted over those 150 years.
I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder as you outline your essays, because it perfectly captures the tragic evolution of war poetry between the Light Brigade and today. Are soldiers merely disciplined tools of the state, meant to be glorified in history, or are they fragile individuals left to suffer the unbearable consequences all alone? Keep that question in the back of your mind, and you are going to write a brilliant analysis. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and best of luck with your studies.